Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. We are back in Westeros as we see George R.R. Martin's fantastic short The Hedge Knight brought to life in this series. Part of this collection, titled A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, this was released to collect the stories of Duncan Egg. You can check that out here or in their graphic novel adaptation, and of course in this brand new TV show. Throughout this video we're going to be going through episode 1 and discussing the book and some of the major things in it, and also lots of spoilers on what could be happening. However, as always, I will save the spoilers until the end of the video. Some stuff we just need to touch upon to add context, like who the king is and so on and so forth, but we won't reveal who won the Dance of the Dragons in case you don't know yet.
I'm nice like that.
Now, this episode very much feels like one of two halves, where there being lots of things laid out that you can read on the surface, but then lots of things they don't reveal that have major implications. And yeah, stick around until the end if you've read the books or simply just want to know more. But I thought this was a very solid premiere. After House of the Dragon Season 2, I was worried that the franchise was dead again, but fear not! This is a fun and sentimental look at life outside of King's Landing, and it's a far more grounded story away from the Game of Thrones. But yeah, that's definitely enough of your time wasted. Now let's get into A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms.
I'm only a hedge knight.
Okay, so the first thing we need to talk about is the timeline and where the show takes place. The opening sentence of the book says it's roughly 100 years before the events described in Game of Thrones. That was more of just a general way to open things up, but since then we've had more clarity on all the times and dates. This season takes place in the year 209, which is 77 years after House of the Dragon Season 2. This places the show around 89 years before Game of Thrones, and it's kind of a bridge between the two. Now because of this, it's been over 50 years since the last dragon died. The book is filled with illustrations by Gary Gianni, and one of the first we see is the skull of a dragon. However, you may notice 3 eggs around it, and you can kind of figure out what that leads to, but we are very much in a different world from the House of the Dragon days, and this goes beyond just the dragons. Tonally, the show's more like a comedy with lots of stuff played for laughs. The 3 stories in here are much lighter in tone compared to the Song of Ice and Fire books, and they're a more whimsical adventure. Sort of like A Knight's Tale rather than kids getting beheaded in their bed. The show's creators have said this is more like a 14th century England and will not shift perspective to the ones who rule Westeros. Unlike House of the Dragon as well, these stories are actual stories as opposed to Fire and Blood, which was pretty much just an in-universe history book. There's a range of different accounts there, with it being a journey through the Targaryen family tree, and for the show the creators basically picked what they thought was canon and then fleshed it out into episodes. But the Hedge Knight is very clear in its story, and that's what they've adapted for the show, even with lots of added bits. Now season 1 will tell the first story, The Hedge Knight, which focuses on the events of the Ashford tourney. At present, King Daeron II sits on the Iron Throne, and it's an interesting time as this is the heir of the Great Spring Sickness, which ends up leading to Brynden Rivers becoming the Hand of the King. Yep, that is the 3-eyed raven who we saw in Game of Thrones and got a brief vision of during House of the Dragon. As for what a hedge knight is, the episode basically touches upon what they are, with them sleeping in the hedges.
It's like a knight, but sadder. It's got to sleep in the hedges because no lord will have it.
However, the book also gives us a bit more of an explanation, with it saying, the only life he knew was the life of a hedge knight, riding from keep to keep, taking service with this lord and that lord, fighting in their battles and eating in their halls until the war was done. There were tourneys from time to time as well, though less often, and he knew that some hedge knights turned robber during lean winters, though the old man never had. It's also important to note that a hedge knight isn't a sellsword or mercenary. Rather, they follow the same code of honor that a knight does and won't lower themselves to be people who don't hit the thumbs up. Now, the show opens just like the book, with Dunk burying the knight that he squires for. This is a man named Sir Arlen, who in the book early on is only referred to as the Old Man. They recaptured the book's opening image perfectly though, and have the 3 horses in tree while Dunk digs the grave. The book also opens with the line, "The spring rains had softened the ground, so Dunk had no trouble digging the grave." Spring is of course a time of new beginnings, so it's fitting that this is where we start the journey at. However, beyond that we also have the idea of death and loss coming in the form of Arlen. I'm guessing that we might get a flashback episode at some point that fills in how the two came to meet, but in case we don't, here's what we learn about Arlen. Arlen originally came from Pennytree, which is a place in the Riverlands. Arlen was a man that was loyal to Highgarden, and he took part in the first Blackfire Rebellion. This was when the bastard son of Princess Daena Targaryen and King Aegon IV led an uprising against the lands. Some felt that Daemon Blackfire was the correct successor to Aegon IV, as the king had handed him the sword Blackfire, which had been passed down from king to king. This originally came from Aegon I, and we saw Viserys bear it before Aegon II got it later. Daemon also legitimized him from a bastard to a true member of the family. Thus, Daemon took the throne. However, after a series of issues, he was seen as weak, and thus his half-brother rebelled. Daemon died in the final battle, and that was that, well, until the second Blackfire Rebellion. Arlen's nephew and squire then died during this war, and he ended up meeting Dunk in King's Landing around the area of Flea Bottom. The young lad was around 5 or 6, and he took him to be his squire. Dunk's mother isn't really mentioned much in the book, but we do know she died when he was young while they lived in King's Landing. In the book, Dunk is around 16 or 17 at the time of the first story, but Peter Claffrey, who plays the character, is actually 29. But we won't knock it down a point for that. Beyond that, it's very, very faithful to the book, and right off the off, the show sets the tones by cribbing lines directly from the text.
Ought to be a septon here.
That comes directly from it, along with,
"You were a true knight. You never beat me when I didn't deserve it."
We can also tell that it's going to be lighter than the previous shows, as we see Dunk getting slapped through different time periods. Now, I couldn't quite make out where these places were, but the pair travelled all around Westeros except the north. Dunk names Maidenpool, where he got blamed for stealing a pie. However, just like the book, he says it wasn't really him.
Except that time in Maidenpool. It was the inn boy ate the widow woman's pie. Not me. I told you. Doesn't matter now.
In the book, we can of course also hear his inner thoughts, and he thinks about how the old man was closer to 60 than 50, and how not many people can say that. He also thinks about how he was generous in his praises, as he didn't have much else to give. Dunk then says,
"I'd leave your sword, but it would only rust in the ground."
Which is also a line that comes directly from the book. Beyond that, he also needs a sword to prove that he was knighted. But yeah, touching upon that line before about how some knights turn robber and the old man never did, within Dunk, this has instilled a sense of honour. Arlen essentially raised him, so he's pretty much a lost father, and the life of a squire is all the characters know. However, though Arlen couldn't provide him much, he's given him a rule of codes and principles, and taught him the values and chivalry of being a knight. That includes defending the weak and upholding the law and hitting the thumbs up. Now, though Arlen was a hedge knight, he was still granted the title of Sir. In real medieval times, they would be similar to a knight on retainer or the second or third sons of lords who wouldn't inherit the lands. As he lies down, Dunk mentions that he could eat like a king for a year if he sold the 3 horses. 2 of these are called Thunder and Old Chestnut, and they all kind of become his travelling companions. The book describes Thunder as an old man's warhorse, which is a line we hear touched upon later.
He's a warhorse, not a boy's pony.
But he obviously feels like he owes it to the old man, doesn't want to chuck them away, and basically like he's caring for them because it's what the old man would have wanted. Deep down, I think he also knows that if he takes this get-rich-quick scheme, then he'll lose it all eventually, and it'll lead to outlawing or beggary. Now in the intro, he also suggests going to a city like Lannisport, which is near Casterly Rock, the home of the Lannisters. The book has this line as well, but they added in Dunk acting it out and telling people to, fuck's sake, I've got to say this because of YouTube. Stop graping people, fuck's sake. As we saw in House of the Dragon, the city's watch wasn't this noble and gallant force that Dunk thinks it to be. He has a naive view of what it means to be a knight and a hero, with him being a lot like Lucy in Fallout. At Ashford, he learns that most of the lords and knights are dickheads and only interested in titles and vanity. The watch is also only just recovered from its second all-time low during Aegon IV's reign. So his only option at the moment is to make money at the Ashford tourney. He also says how the sword fits his grip as well as it did Sir Arlen's. This shows how Dunk is ready to take up where Arlen left off and become a knight himself. But there is some doubt in his head. In the book, he decides to wear the shield over his back, clearly showing the sigil so that people get the impression he's a knight. Dunk is desperate to live up to Arlen from the off, and there is an omen that he's on the right track. This comes when he spots a robin in an oak tree. This is a direct reference to the line in the book, and it's also something he says later on that was there when he got knighted. Which, did you though? However, it is a very important moment as robins symbolise hope, new beginnings and renewal, and they often herald in the spring. It is thought in some cultures as well that robins also represent visits from deceased loved ones. So having this here as he says goodbye to Arlen and starts off his journey, it's a very great moment. We then get the Game of Thrones theme playing. Obviously, you're expecting an intricate title sequence and getting hyped up to be the new Game of Thrones show. Game of Thrones, boys, we are back. Hot D motherfuckers. I love the cut to him just shitting behind a tree though, and that's also a reference to the season 8 finale.
Best season ever!
Now this takes us to a rather low-key title sequence which basically sums up the whole show. I do like how it basically tells us right from the off though that this isn't your typical Thrones show. It's a very somber affair, even with the death kickstarting the story, and it's here that he heads off with Arlen's shield. It's also important to note that the shield is very, very battered and shows that hedge knights don't have the money that the knights of a keep do. The book describes how ill-fitting everything is and how the old man's belt is meant for skinny hips. But Dunk puts it on to try and live up to his master, which is a fitting metaphor for the series. He thinks about how he has 3 silver coins, which is enough for a good meal and as much ale as he cares to drink. He really should focus on his finances though, and check out our sponsors at Rocket Money. Okay, so right after Black Friday and the holidays, I know it can be difficult keeping an eye on your finances, especially since, if you're like me, you have lots of different subscription services across streaming sites, your gym membership, and whatever else on top of it. Keeping an eye on your hidden fees, or even stuff you've forgotten to cancel, can mean you're paying for things that you don't really have to. That's where our sponsors Rocket Money comes in. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Rocket Money has a track subscription tab, and it actually allows you to cancel in most cases directly from the app with just a few taps. This means you avoid charges and save time either having to go through a contact or account settings to do it in most cases. There's also automatic transaction categorization across accounts. You can group things together too and tag certain transactions to reveal spending patterns or add context to what some charges are. You can also set budgets and goals as well as setting personalized insights and reports. Rocket Money will also send real-time alerts for large transactions when there's an upcoming bill, a refund, or a low balance. The app also consolidates checking, savings, loans, and investments into a single dashboard to give users a clear view of their financial picture. Rocket Money is a massive money and time saver that will help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/spoilers. That's rocketmoney.com/spoilers. rocketmoney.com/spoilers and go check it out. Huge thank you again to them. So yeah, that Dunk then rides Sweetfoot and arrives at the inn, which is where he meets a small boy with a shaven head. In the book, the boy's coming out of some water and is just outside the stables. He also first appears naked, and yeah, you can obviously see why they didn't want to do that for the series. This is Egg, who's a very good egg though, and he becomes a big character in the franchise. For now though, he's just a lowly stable boy who starts by smart-mouthing Dunk. Dunk seemingly imitates Arlen and the other adults he saw growing up as he threatens the stable boy with a clout around the ear. All this stuff about Egg saying he could help if he wanted to, and Dunk saying he'll get a clout, that's all stuff that comes directly from the text. As a fan of it, I just loved seeing these words come to life, and they've clearly paid close attention to the novel. Entering the inn though, it's very ominously empty except for one dude passed out drunk and a guy in front of the fire. Dunk's been offered food just like the book, and again the scene, complete with dialogue, is almost one for one with the text.
There's good lamb, roasted with a crust of herbs, and some ducks my son shot down. Which will you have?
Both.
And yeah, I love how Dunk just says both. There's no health and safety here either, and no scores on the doors as the lady drinks out of the cup and then she fills it for Dunk. As she mentions, the entire place is empty, as it turns out everyone's headed for the tourney at Ashford. She seems to have contempt for the knights though and says,
"And I never knew a joust to change the price of eggs."
They even touch upon the girl on the steps who we cut to next, and in the book it says she basically giggles at all the knights who ride past. Now, though the innkeeper says she hasn't known a tourney to change things or the price of eggs, this one does change the future of Westeros and eggs. I'm saving that for the spoiler section, I do promise you that, but the future changing is hinted to in the next shot with his line from a drunken lord.
I dreamed of you.
It's something we will talk about in our big spoiler section as the dream plays a massive part in the story. Visions and dreams go right back to Daenerys the Dreamer, who prophesied that Valyria would fall. Helena Targaryen also had weird cryptic prophecies in House of the Dragon, and we had the Weirwood Tree during Season 2. The drunk then stands up and says nothing, but he does say a bit more in the book. He says he's going to be sick and wanted a whore, but unfortunately there were none. The innkeeper then tells Dunk to ignore the Lord, implying that he's drunk and that there's a weird secret going on. A coin's also placed on the table, which appears to be a clue. There we can spot a Targaryen sigil, which you'll know from its usage on the banners in the kingdom. Can't really touch upon it without ruining most of the plot, but the book does give us an insight into Dunk's thoughts. A sad creature, thought Dunk. But why did he think he knew me? He pondered that a moment over his ale. Like the book, Dunk then enters the stable to find Egg wearing his armour and sitting atop his horse. I think it's clear they used a lot of the illustrations for inspiration, and luckily they appear quite frequently. Almost unlike pretty much every page, as you can see. Now, there's no promised clout around the ear, and Dunk gets properly roasted.
Your belt's made of rope.
In the book, the way they break this part's up phenomenal as well, and they had the two characters standing on opposite pages. Egg then says that his mum is dead and reveals he isn't actually the innkeeper's son. It's a similar story to Dunk, which is why he almost takes pity on him. A knight took pity on him and lifted him out of Flea Bottom before then making him a squire. This is something he eventually does for Egg, but here he turns down the request. Now in the book, we learn what Dunk's thinking, and he does this because he thinks Egg will have a better life at the inn than he will on the road. He throws him a coin and says he'll scoop it up the minute he's gone, but as we see, little Egg doesn't. And this is a great little detail, and one that shows that he's not interested in money. It then feels like I'm playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 as our lad heads to Ashford. Luckily for him, there's no bandits on the road, but Ashford is surrounded by people trying to earn money while the tournament's going on. Dunk then checks out the tourney grounds, and we've seen tourneys like this a couple of times in the show, and they're often what kickstarts a series. The Mountain Ormos kill Loras Tyrell in Season 1, and Daemon fought against Criston Cole in the House of the Dragon premiere. We also had Brienne of Tarth fight to become part of Renly's King's God. Now this is a bit spoilery, but they do touch upon it in lots of different things, so you should know by now, you fake fan if you don't know, but Brienne is one of Dunk's ancestors. That's where she got her height from, and you can see shades of her character here in Dunk. Dunk then looks up at the castle, and we can see the Lannister camp below it. Now this is slightly different from the work, as there are towers over everything. At the castle, we can see the House Ashford banners being put up along with the Ashford soldiers. In the book, Arlen had taught Dunk to recognise the banners of every house, despite being unable to read or write. The arrival is pretty much exactly how it plays out in the source material as well, with even the kids fighting with swords in the background. Dunk then rides past some of the grounds and sees the joust's preparation. Now, this is where the story starts to deviate from the book in structure, so I don't need to hold it up anymore. It does come back around towards the end though, and when he meets Egg, that's basically where things go from here. The episode covers roughly about the first 20 pages of the book though, with the whole story being 180! In the book, he also tries to sell one of the horses and purchase some armor from a blacksmith named Steely Pate. This is someone who we will likely see later on, as the character has been cast for the show. It's after this though that he goes to visit the Master of Games. Outside we can see a sun sigil, which is the House of Ashford. Arriving at the office, I love how this dude just has his kids playing in his office, which reminds me a lot of me working from home, and it's something I have to put up with a lot of the fucking time. And if the background ever changes mid-video, it's because the kids run in and stole something off it and ran back out. But yeah, Dunk tries to enter by saying that he was knighted, but the master hasn't heard of the island of Pennytree. Now this is actually a large village in the Riverlands that has constantly exchanged ownership. The Brackens and Blackwoods often fight over it, and we've seen their rivalry throughout the House of the Dragon series. I also love these quick flashback to Dunk's youth. In the present, Dunk tells him that Arlen said he was to be a knight, and we then flash back to the past where he asks him the question and Arlen just ignores him. It almost feels very Monty Python-esque. He appears to remember his time as a squire a bit better than it actually happened, and is clearly trying to show himself as being glorious. Dunk says that he swore to serve the realm with all his might, but there were no witnesses, which reminds me of when J.R.R. Tolkien said I should finish the Game of Thrones series or something, but no one was around. And it was J.R.R. Tolkien, I remember. The Master then reveals that quite a grim punishment awaits if he can find no one to claim that Sir Arlen was indeed real. Well, punishment, depending on who you ask him. A chair and a sword might be nice to your mum, eh? However, it's all a prank, and this is all new for the books. He says this is the Reach though, not the Riverlands, and kind of shows how little they care here. In the books, the Tullys ruled over the Riverlands, and there they put honour above everything. Whereas here, they're kind of grossly hocking phlegm into a jug. I'm not even going to do an impression of it. It grossed me out, that. The Master then mentions that they couldn't have poor farmers chasing down Lionel Baratheon, who's someone we meet a bit later. The book mentions his nickname, the Laughing Storm, and we see him put on a massive party.
Lionel Baratheon, the Laughing Storm they call him.
Now this nickname is because he laughs when fighting in battle or tourneys. I'll discuss his lineage when we get to that scene, but if you've been following the channel for a while, you'll all know Ned will love a bit of the Baratheons. Ned, you bastard! For now though, Dunk needs money. However, Lord Ashford has charged the Master to turn away any lad in Night or Sellsword looking for a challenge. The tourney in the book is in honour of his daughter's 13th name day, and he's most likely trying to curry favour with the crown. This is something that Lionel also touches on later when Dunk meets him, and the Master says that there's princes about the area. We see these later on, and it's helping with the world building without really diving too heavily into it. The showrunners have stated that without the dragons, the royals need to actually care about the people, as they can't just rule through fear. They have to be present and curry favour and even be seen at a minor lord's tourney. The land was rocked massively in the Dance of the Dragons, and there's still somewhat a bit of an uneasy peace. However, because royals are attending the events, only the most prestigious knights are allowed to take part. The Master then takes pity on him though, and asks if any true knight here would be able to remember his late master. It's here that Dunk remembers that Arlen served House Dondarrion. This was when Lord Dondarrion, Lord Percy Carnan, raised an army to defeat the Vulture King. That's a title that's been used by a number of different people who try to fight against the rule of the crown from the Red Mountains. Now, you may also recognise the house name as Beric Dondarrion was in the Game of Thrones show. Duncan says that Manfred will remember him, and if he can get him to speak to the Master, then he can then enter the tournament. And we will have a show! He doesn't admit that he doesn't have the coin for the ransom in the book, and here he's a little more bumbling as well. Such as when he hits his head and then says 7. The 7 is of course the gods in this world, so it's kind of like saying like, God's sake. I appreciate that attention to detail as well though, and it's something that you probably would say if you smacked your head like the like button. Peter Claffrey, who plays Dunk, is also about 6'3", and he's actually a former rugby player. Naturally as well, medieval buildings were tiny, and I've bumped my head countless times in York. And I'm 6'2", so I'm not that much smaller than him. I'm a giant. But Dunk is off to find someone who can say, yes, I remember your lord, and it's totally legit he'd knight you. Now outside we can see a guy walking on the left, and I actually noticed him in the tent later on when watching the show. I loved seeing the recurring background characters, and it just keeps us feeling like it's a real life marketplace. Behind Dunk we can also see the tent adorned with antlers, which becomes a big location later on. These are the Baratheon pavilions, and we then see the sigil of Tyrell on the left. That is a flower, and we have Dondarrion on the right, which is forked lightning. This is because a messenger from the Storm King, the ancient house of Dondarrion, was ambushed by Dornish men. Luckily, lightning killed the enemies, and he managed to reach the Storm King in time. For his bravery, he was then made Lord Dondarrion, and since then, they've carried the forked lightning sigil. Now, Dunk arrives at the tent, and we see our first redhead chomping on some chicken. I believe she plays a dead woman later on, and we meet 2 of the other redhead ladies of the night. Manfred seems to have picked these women because they all have red hair, like him, and the man's clearly got a type. Apparently, it's all part of his ambition to make everyone have red hair, even if he has to bang a dude's wife. For now though, Manfred's just asleep, and thus Dunk has to kind of just wander around the area. One of them also offers to wake him for a stag, which you might think refers to an animal. However, it is a silver coin, which is a step below the gold dragon that we saw at the inn earlier. The Baratheon sigil is of course a stag, and yeah, it's all kind of playing into who rules what. Poor old Dunk though, he's super broke, so he can't even do that. However, luckily for him, our membership program where you get a breakdown a week early is just 99 cents a month, and even he can afford it. Either way, the other woman roasts him for being a hedge knight. I love how bumbling Dunk is though, as he's just constantly talking to his horse and basically just walking about the area resolute in his ambition to earn money and live his dream of being the truest of all knights. And yeah, he's probably the most earnest person here. He then walks past the training grounds and can see 2 Fossaways sparring. It's a brutal fight, and Stefan Fossaway defeats his cousin Raymond. They're from Cider Hall, which is our first of the apple puns. They talk about not being ripe, seeds, branches, and being rotten to the core. And I half expected Raymond to break out the apple dance. On the helmet, you can also see the sigil, which is a very big red apple. Now, they claim to be descended from the legendary Age of Heroes archer who was known as Foss the Archer. He became famous for shooting apples off the heads of women, which is something clearly inspired by William Tell. Stefan then challenges Duncan to a spar. He says that his sword is his by right, and it's so funny when Stefan says that's an odd thing to say, which is not a line in the book. But Duncan is like, yeah, I'm not getting involved in this weird family dispute. The pair, however, will prove to be big players in Duncan's story later on, hence why they're getting so much emphasis here. It's also important to know that an Owen Fossaway was also mentioned during Fire and Blood, and we might see him during Season 3, especially as we're kind of getting a soft introduction here. Dunk then finds a secluded spot near an elm tree and bathes, and it killed me how even he's grossed out by the smell of his own clothes. Now this is where I'd normally do my merch store shout out, but you've had enough adverts, so I'm skipping it. I will spare you this. Missing from this part of the story though is Duncan looking at a dragonfly and wondering why it was called that when it didn't look like a dragon. It's here that he then recalls Eowlin telling him about the last time that he saw a real dragon. His grandfather had taken him to King's Landing and saw the last dragon a year before it died. Dunk says it was green and stumpy and perished after being poisoned by Aegon III. In the book, he then went to try and buy some armour, and I do wonder if they're saving that for next time. Duncan then rides into town and learns that Manfred's still napping due to his gouty toes. The woman named Red is also helping sew up a dude's trousers, and the bro's just out there completely Donald ducking. Following her into the tent, we then see a woman who appears to be dead. However, there's no Silent Sisters to prepare the body. We do see the stones on the eye though, and 'tis all playing on the tradition that the High Sparrow explained during Season 6 of Game of Thrones.
Do you know why we use these stones? To remind us not to fear death. We close our eyes on this world and open them on the next.
Considering these are also ladies of the night, it means that someone has a very, very creepy fetish. The women then compare their profession to his own. They both put their bodies at risk for the pleasure of strangers. He doesn't heed their warning though that jousting's a dangerous profession, as it's the only way to make some money and possibly live in a castle in service of a lord. He's just got to use his god-given gifts, and being so tall has its advantages in jousting. We then get a massive nighttime tour of the town, which leads into a banquet. This scene is new to the show and isn't in the book at all, but it does help to add some colour to Dunk's story. The Hedge Knight story is only like 118 pages long, with illustrations as well, so naturally needed some padding. Maybe a Lady of the Night's spin-off franchise. That has kind of gotten developed via Shay in Game of Thrones and Mysaria in House of the Dragon though, and they've been quite fleshed out in these seasons, with Mysaria not really being that much in the book, and make the Ladies of the Night spin-off show. But yeah, recently George R. R. Martin has said that he's given the showrunner like 10 different ideas. I think he's 10 or 11 ideas for where Dunk and Egg could go that haven't been in the books, and yeah, we're getting more Dunk and Egg content to live out the rest of time. But George, can you please finish the fucking main series?
No, I don't think I will.
But yeah, we're getting focused on a lot of different side characters, and the showrunners are aiming to flesh out the world of Westeros beyond the Lord, so it makes sense that they'd want to tell their stories. Both Shay and Mysaria mainly interacted with Highborn Lannisters or the Royal Targaryens, so it's a nice change of pace to see them interact with someone who's barely even a knight. If a knight at all. They say farewell and tell him to go look after his body, as it's the only one he's going to get. Guy's just going to put himself all on the line though, and it's during this point that he comes across a puppet show. This is similar to the book, however the dragon's much larger here than how it is in the novel. And it even like breathes fire and shit. It's here that we first see Tanzell, aka Tanzell Too Tall, who will be a major catalyst for the events of the show moving forward. She's played by Tamsin Crawford, and in the book she's nearly as tall as Dunk himself. He becomes infatuated here and basically loves her across all the Dunk and Egg stories, and you can see why this moment would captivate him. These puppet shows are also something that was in the other series too. We've seen similar shows from Mummers and others, such as the puppet show in House of the Dragon and the play that Arya sees in Bravos. The show itself here is all about Serwyn of the Mirror Shield, who's someone that Dunk thinks about in the book. Serwyn existed in the ancient times of heroes during a time after the Children of the Forest made a pact with the First Men. According to the legends, he saved Princess Daerissa from the giants and also slew the dragon Urax, which is most likely the dragon that we see here. Or Urax, look, the pronunciations are fucked. During this fight though, Serwyn used a polished shield to trick the dragon and speared it through the eye. It's of course inspired by the story of Perseus, who killed Medusa with a mirrored shield. He used it to avoid her gaze and then lop her head off. And it was a similar thing to basically what happened here. Speaking of gazes, right away we can see it's love at first sight, but he has duties to attend to first. Outside, he's then interrupted by Raymond Fossaway, who calls him a half-man. Raymond even says,
Aye, half man, half giant.
Half-man is the same nickname given to Tyrion Lannister, but there it meant because he was short. Raymond sees it as a compliment though, which reminds me of Hodor. Osha theorized that he had giant's blood in him because of his height and his third leg. The second meeting here though is different to the book, as there he just watched the day's jousting with Egg. We then get another apple pun.
Though he is the senior branch of the apple tree.
At the moment, Raymond's only a squire, and thus he can't enter the tourney. But he does want to, and we'll talk about him more in the spoiler section. For now though, we've seen he's a good fighter, and Raymond then asks who shield dunk means to strike. The chivalrous thing is to say none, but the knights usually have scores that they want to settle, or simply prove themselves by fighting the best. He asks if Dunk's hungry, and Dunk says he's hungry all the time, and the pair then head to Sir Lionel's pavilion. He's played by Daniel Ings, who you may recognise from the Gentleman TV show or Sex Education. The Lord tries to make a speech or a profound thought and says that 4,000 years ago, their ancestors fought with sticks, which then invented jousting. Now he might be referring to the coming of the Andals and the subsequent war between them and the First Men. He's far more measured for now though than his descendant Robert Baratheon, who I can slowly feel taking over my body. Ned, you bastard. Oh, Bessie. Oh, get out, Robert, you bastard. Now, I love how awkward Dunk looks as he pours some wine and everyone hangs on the Lord's word. Lionel isn't much of an orator though, and just offers 100 gold to the person, man, beast or god, who sticks him best. Now, maybe he is more like his descendant Robert Baratheon than he is like Renly.
Start the damn joust before I piss myself.
And a far cry from Stannis the Manus. As mentioned, this scene is new for the show though, and Dunk gets to eat as much as he wants while everyone dances. He then sees the chance to speak to Lionel, and it's like a medieval club with him going to the VIP area. Lionel asks him if he's been punched in the face before, and Dunk makes a good impression by just being very earnest. Dunk explains that where he grew up, you learn to go unnoticed. Flea Bottom was a hive of scum and villainy, and being the biggest guy there, Dunk would want to keep a low profile. Which, yeah, obviously, someone would want to make a name for themselves by defeating the tallest guy in town. Lionel says that the 7 above gave him tallness though, so he should be tall. Now this is further hammering home the idea he needs to use what the gods gave him. It's also a bit of jokey banter where he says if he doesn't stand tall, he'll name him a heretic and burn him, drown him, or drop him off a tall something. That something is what would have been done to witches or anyone who is deemed a heretic by the church in the Middle Ages. Lionel is expecting something from Dunk to curry his favour, but he's got nothing but his clothes and horses. Even a lord who can barely pay his ransom and whose people are poor handed over a knife to curry favour with Lionel. This shows the bleak feudalism of the Seven Kingdoms. Even though the lord's people starve in the winter, he still has to hand over a dagger to the lord for help. If sold, it might have fed a few of his people through winter, but he has to give it up to pay respect. Now the lord is also referred to as smug, and it does show that even the minor lords can just be out for themselves. Basically, everyone's jockeying for a higher position in the realm, and yeah, this is usually at the cost of their subjects' well-being. Lionel is clearly paranoid as well, as he thinks if someone doesn't bring a tribute, then they must be there to get him. But yeah, Dunk just says he's there for supper, which Lionel likes and says makes sense. I love how it's a very uneasy first meeting though, and how, it feels like if Dunk puts one foot wrong, then he could end up being killed. Speaking of putting a foot wrong, they then dance and have a macho game of trying to step on each other's feet. In the book, Dunk often thinks about whether he would even be allowed to challenge or joust a highborn lord or even a royal. So this is just an early sign that he'll be able to fight against those of a higher stature than him. That stature and those barriers are broken as we cut to Dunk next wearing the crown. I love this little touch as well, and shows just how much of good sport the lord is and how he doesn't see himself as better than. Lionel then recounts what sounds like a naval battle where he drove his ship into a storm. It wasn't a matter of being afraid, but something he had to do as his ancestors had done it before. Now I did try and find some information on this battle, but I don't recognise the name Ion, so let us know in the comments below if you do. This is important though, as Lionel's touching upon loyalty and duty here. Doesn't matter if you're scared or don't want to rule, a lord needs to put everything aside and live just as his ancestors did. Baratheons are notably tough and strong, so being weak amongst the family is not an option, you bastard! Many lives rest on the Lord holding their position as well though, and this is why Robert found it so ironic that he was killed in a simple hunt. Dunk, however, agonizes over things while Lionel has 2 centuries of family to be inspired by. Both are big and strong men, but luckily for Lionel, he has the advantage of his upbringing. It's kind of like when Jon Snow joined the Night's Watch and he easily beats up the bullies as he's had a master of arms to train him. Dunk is basically like the kids who joined up, purely because they had no hope in life. Lionel sees his tournament as an honour though, especially in this time of peace. There's no wars to fight, no way to really prove his strength beyond these artificial battles, so he has to embrace this because this is the only opportunity he's going to get to show that he is indeed deserving of his title and his name as well. Now if he loses, he does have the money to pay the ransom back with ease. As for Dunk though, he would be ruined, and as Lionel says, not even a knight, as he's also lost his horse. Dunk then asks him what he should do, and Lionel says,
I don't know.
he does know, because he's never been in a position like this. However, as much as he's above Dunk in stature, he may be the only lord who will ever actually speak to the character on a human level. Even with that though, the pair are still separated by the status given to them upon birth. Now while the pair are talking, we can also see Lionel use a small hammer as a fork. This is probably a reach, but it might be a reference to his future descendant, Robert. Oh, don't mention his name, he's coming back! You fucking bastard, Ned! Oh, get out! Robert, out! He infamously used a warhammer in battle and used it to kill Prince Rhaegar at the Battle of the Trident. And tridents are fork-shaped, and we did say it would be a reach. Lionel then leaves, and it's at this point in the night when people have coupled off and it's time to head home with a kebab as you haven't pulled. But Dunk then spots Manfred Dundarian being let out of the tent and he goes to try and speak to him. Manfred is just a massive dickhead though, and he's shocked that Manfred can't remember Sir Alan. We then see a flashback of Arlen having an arrow pulled from his stomach, but Manfred says his father took 800 men into the mountains and it would be impossible to remember every single person. However, don't have to be rude about it. But that's it for Dunk. All the hopes that were pinned on Manfred remembering Arlen, that's all gone up in smoke now. He arrives back at the camp only to find Egg, who's made a fire and is cooking a fish that he caught, which is just like the book. Egg has proved himself to be a decent squire already though, as he's groomed the horses, washed his clothes and also made a fire. It doesn't stop him from roasting Dunk again though, as he asks where his pavilion is and even mocks his name. Now in the book, Dunk isn't sure where his name came from, and Arlen had just called him pretty much Dunk since they met. And even as an orphan, he'd never thought what it might be short for. Here though, he seems to know, but it could just be bluffing. He then lets a boy squire for him on the condition that he keeps the morals of being a knight. Dunk says he'll be fed and have clothes on his back and not beat him unless he deserves it, which echoes his thoughts on the old man. Egg seems to enjoy this slumming it though and mentions the shooting star and how it brings luck to those that see it. A falling star brings luck to him who sees it, Dunk thought. But the rest of them are all in their pavilions now, staring up at silk instead of sky, so the luck is mine alone. I think it also speaks to seeing the beauty of the world when that's all you have to look at. The lords are busy in their parties, focused on themselves, whereas Dunk and Egg are looking up at the sky with hope in their hearts. A shooting star above a tree also becomes Duncan's sigil, and this moment is very, very important. This is a really good omen though, and in the Game of Thrones show and source material, you may remember the Red Comet from Season 2. Different factions across Westeros took it as an omen with various meanings, and some thought it was a good omen for Robb Stark, a return of the dragons, or a good sign for the Lannisters. Daemon even saw it during his vision at Luigi's mansion, Harrenhal. Dunk will spoil it later, but we end the episode with his omen bearing down on the pair and their newly formed union. That ends the episode, and overall I thought this was a fantastic addition to the Game of Thrones live action universe. Early GOT, it did have funny moments, and I think a show that's more hopeful, more earnest will delight a lot of fans, book readers, and people who also haven't read the books and aren't even fans. I also think it nicely juxtaposes House of the Dragon as well. Whereas that's serious and about wars and fighting kids, it's nice to see just some common folk in Westeros. So I really enjoyed it, and it was a fantastic adaptation for the start of the book. Now, we have of course read that, and I'm guessing some of you have as well, so we'll now go to the spoil and eggs section. Spoil and eggs, we'll call it for now, we'll change it next week. But that's a section of the video where we talk about what's really going on. If you don't want to know, please turn off now. but thank you for coming on this journey, and luck be with you too. Now, the show doesn't reveal the stable boy's identity or the dude at the table at the end during the start of the episode. However, the fact he didn't pick up the coin, the fact he talks in a very posh, almost noble accent are all clues to exactly who he is. Yes, the stable boy Egg is actually Prince Aegon. He'd go on to be crowned Aegon V, and the guy at the table is actually Prince Daeron, with both being the sons of Prince Maekar. The pair are not at the tourney as Daeron didn't want to fight and thus ran off with Egg, who just so happens to be his squire. When Aegon mentions that his mother's dead, this is also true as Dinah Dane died between 201 and 209. Now Daeron doesn't have the same hair that his family's known for, so he can hide in plain sight. Unfortunately, Aegon does, so his brother shaves it constantly. But this is something we've seen throughout the franchise with those very, very strong boys of Rhaenyra not having the typical Targaryen locks. We also had the Valyrian kid shave his head when he was faking his death. His half-brother Alan of Hull also shaved his head in season 2, so hair and that being tied to identity is just a common theme throughout the franchise. Now Maekar managed to become king after both Daeron II and his successor Aerys I died. After this, Egg would then take the throne but die at Summerhall and then be succeeded by Jaehaerys. Jaehaerys would then be succeeded by Aerys, who was the Mad King and the father of both Rhaegar and Daenerys. There's so much bloody incest throughout the whole thing that Egg actually wanted to stop inbreeding in the family, and this was because he'd spent so much time with the small folk and kind of saw it as being like, look, we need to stop fucking our cousins and sisters and brothers and mothers and shit. But yeah, Rhaegar was the father of Jon Snow, who was integral to stopping the White Walkers from taking over Westeros, as well as having weird boat sex with his auntie. But yes, a night can make a difference because it's implied in the world of Fire and Ice that Dunk say Rhaella, the mother of Rhaegar. And thus a night has changed not only the price of eggs, but also the future of eggs on toast. Now, during the introduction, Daeron says that he dreamed of Dunk, which in the show seems like it's just drunken ramblings. However, in the book, this is in fact a vision. He was dreaming of Duncan in front of a dead dragon, which scared him because his dreams usually come true. At first, it was thought this would be Aerion that Duncan ends up having to fight in the Trial of the Seven. However, it ends up being Baelor, Egg's uncle, who sided with Dunk in the trial. Now, Egg has been mentioned before in the main show, as his brother Aemon was the Maester of the Night's Watch.
My brother Aegon reigned after him when I had refused the throne.
Now beyond that, during the episode, Raymond said he was only a squire and Dunk says that he fights well for one. As book readers will know, he ends up fighting for Dunk after Lionel knights him. This is because Dunk ends up hitting Prince Aerion after the smug knobhead was hurting Tanzel. This leads to Dunk getting arrested and Egg reveals his identity. Due to the squire's intervention, Dunk must then defend himself in the Trial of the Seven. The previous one happened when Maegor I was challenged for the crown during the first faithful militant uprising. It's basically a trial by combat akin to what we saw Bronn undertake in the main show. Except here, the accused and the accuser form two teams of 7 knights in order to fight against each other. Should either side win by death or through forcing the other to yield, then the matter is settled in the eyes of the god. Should the accused not be able to find 6 other men to join his side though, he will forfeit and be found guilty by default. Now, the way the show's laid out, I'm kind of expecting the second half of the season to deal with this. So we might build up to how awful Prince Aerion is in the next episode, and then actually see some jousting, get him all this stuff with Tanzel, making the team, and then close out with a big fight. But yeah, that wraps up the video. Lots of stuff I've kind of rambled over there, but I hope you guys have enjoyed us going through the episode. Please drop a like on the video as well, and drop a comment with all your thoughts below, and if you want to follow us on Instagram, then make sure you check us out at Heavy Spoilers. If you want something else to watch and you're currently following Fallout, why not check out our breakdowns on the series right now? If not though, huge thank you for sitting through this video. I've been your host Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.